All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Today, we are going to be diving into Freeport-McMoRan's Q4 2024 earnings call.
Yeah, this should be an interesting one.
Definitely a lot to unpack here. We're talking strong financials, ambitious growth plans, a little bit of international intrigue, the whole shebang.
Absolutely. Well, what's really fascinating to me is how Freeport is navigating, this complex geopolitical landscape while also capitalizing on the huge and growing demand for copper.
Yeah, the metal of electrification, right?
Exactly.
And they are certainly not shy about those growth plans either. We're talking potentially doubling production at one site, a massive new project in Chile, and then this whole innovative leach thing that they keep mentioning.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, me too. Sounds like we got a lot to cover.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in.
Sounds good.
So first things first, let's talk about their overall performance in Q4. How did they do?
Well, they hit their sales target, which is always a good sign.
Always a good start.
And they actually managed to improve their cost efficiency as well.
Okay, exceeding expectations on sales and efficiency. That's a strong start. But what about the bottom line? Give us the financial highlights.
All right, so financially, Freeport is looking really solid. Their EBITDA for the year topped $10 billion, which is a 14% jump from the previous year.
Wow.
And their operating cash flows surged by 35% to over $7 billion.
That's impressive. What's driving those strong numbers?
Well, a big factor is the strong average copper price. We're looking at $4.21 per pound.
Okay, so copper prices are definitely working in their favor.
For sure.
But I can't help but think about that fire they had at their new Indonesian smelter earlier this year. What impact did that have on their operations?
Yeah, that was definitely a setback, no question about it. But the good news is that repairs are already underway.
That's good to hear.
And they're estimating that production will restart by mid-2025.
Okay, so not a complete disaster.
Right. And in the meantime, they've managed to secure export permissions for 2024.
Phew, that's a relief.
Yeah, and they're actively working to get approvals for 2025 as well.
Okay, so they're on top of it. But let's talk about the elephant in the room here. Indonesian politics. It's a notoriously complex landscape for businesses, and Freeport has a lot at stake there.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. Freeport has a long and complicated history in Indonesia going back decades.
Decades.
Yeah, and they're very aware of the political dynamics there, so they're proactively engaging with the new presidential administration.
I bet.
Their main goals are to secure continued export permissions, and even more importantly, to extend their operating license beyond its current expiration date of 2041.
2041, that's a long way off.
It is, but these things take time, and it's better to start early.
Makes sense. So it sounds like they're walking a bit of a tightrope there.
Definitely a delicate balancing act.
But let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture.
Right.
How is the overall copper market performing? And where does Freeport fit in?
Well, the copper market has had its ups and downs this past year. But the underlying demand from major players like the US and China remains really strong.
Okay, so despite the volatility, there's still a strong appetite for copper.
Exactly. And this demand is being fueled by massive investments in things like infrastructure upgrades, particularly in the electrical grid.
Makes sense. With the push towards renewable energy and electrification, we're going to need a lot more copper.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the ongoing electric vehicle revolution.
Right? EVs need copper too. So Freeport is in a good position to capitalize on this growing demand.
They are, especially given the increasing concerns about potential long-term copper deficits.
So they're facing some challenges, but also riding a wave of opportunity. It's a very interesting situation.
It is.
And then on top of all of this, they've got this whole Leach Everywhere initiative that they're pushing. Can you break that down for us? What exactly does it entail?
Yeah, so Leach Everywhere is essentially Freeport's strategy to get more copper out of resources that were previously considered waste material.
Okay, so like squeezing every last drop out of what they've got.
In a way, they're doing this through an innovative leaching process, which basically involves using a chemical solution to dissolve the copper from low-grade ore.
So they're basically finding hidden value where others saw only waste.
Exactly. And it's proving to be incredibly efficient, both from a cost and environmental perspective.
Interesting. So it's not just about doing more, it's about doing it smarter and more sustainably.
Right. And it's already showing really promising results. In 2024, they achieved a 50% increase in copper production just through this method alone.
Wow, 50%.
And they did it at a remarkably low cost.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
What's their long-term goal with this initiative?
Well, their aim is to reach a run rate of 300 million pounds of copper produced through leaching by the end of 2025.
Okay, so a significant chunk of their overall production.
Yeah. And the ultimate goal is to extract an additional 800 million pounds per year.
Those are some ambitious targets, but they're not putting all their eggs in one basket, right?
Mhm.
What about their other growth projects, particularly in the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. Freeport is pursuing a multi-pronged growth strategy. In the U.S., they're advancing what they call brownfield expansion opportunities at their Baghdad and Lone Star mines.
Okay, so expanding existing operations rather than starting from scratch.
Exactly. At Baghdad, they're investing in infrastructure upgrades, things like improving the efficiency of their processing plants and enhancing their transportation network.
Okay, makes sense. What about Lone Star?
At Lone Star, they're actually looking at doubling their current production, which stands at around 300 million pounds per year.
Wow, double the production. That's a bold goal.
It is. It'll involve expanding their mining operations, building new processing facilities, and optimizing their existing infrastructure. It's a multi-year project, but they seem confident they can pull it off.
Okay, so they're playing the long game, but they've got a clear vision for the future.
Exactly.
Now, we've talked about their Indonesian operations, their innovative leaching process, and their U.S. growth plans. But what about their global ambitions? We can't forget about that massive El Abra project in Chile. What's the latest on that front?
Ah, yes, El Abra. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So El Abra, it's a huge undertaking. I mean, we're talking about a brand new concentrator, a desalination plant to provide all the water they'll need, and a pipeline stretching for miles.
Wow, that's a lot of infrastructure.
It is. And once it's all up and running, it's projected to add a whopping 750 million pounds of copper to their annual production, plus another 9 million pounds of molybdenum.
That's a game changer.
Yeah, it's a significant boost to their overall output.
But as we've talked about, these things take time. What's the timeline looking like for El Abra?
Realistically, we're probably looking at 7 to 8 years before it's fully operational.
Okay, so patience is key with this one.
Definitely. The permitting process is still ongoing, and construction on this scale takes time.
Makes sense. So they're really setting themselves up for significant growth in the years to come.
They are, but it's important to remember that there are always risks involved, particularly in the mining industry.
Right, of course. What are some of the key risks they're facing?
Well, their operations in Indonesia are subject to political uncertainties, as we've discussed.
Right, double operating license situation.
Exactly. And then there are always the inherent risks associated with large-scale mining, things like environmental concerns, safety issues, and commodity price fluctuations.
Yeah, those are all important factors to consider.
They are. But it seems like Freeport is aware of these challenges and they're taking steps to mitigate them.
Okay, so they're not just burying their heads in the sand.
No, they're being proactive, which is good to see.
That's reassuring. So to sum up, we've got a company with a global footprint, a solid financial position, a commitment to innovation, and some very ambitious growth plans.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix.
It is. What does all of this mean for investors who are following Freeport-McMoRan?
Well, I think Freeport is a company at a crossroads. They're balancing the immense potential of their Indonesian operations with these exciting new opportunities in the U.S. and beyond.
And they're doing it all while navigating a complex global landscape with all sorts of geopolitical and economic challenges.
Exactly. And their performance in Q4 2024 shows that they're capable of delivering value to shareholders even amidst all this uncertainty.
Okay, so they've got a proven track record.
They do. And I think what's most intriguing to me is their focus on innovation as a driver of future growth.
Right, like their Leach Everywhere initiative and those autonomous trucks we talked about.
Exactly. Those are prime examples of their forward-thinking approach. They're not just sitting back and waiting for things to happen. They're actively looking for ways to improve their operations and stay ahead of the curve.
And that's got to be appealing to investors who are looking for companies that are not just profitable, but also positioned for long-term growth.
Absolutely. They're not just thinking about the next quarter or even the next year. They're thinking about the next decade and beyond.
Okay, so big picture thinking.
Big picture thinking. And I think that's what sets Freeport apart from a lot of other companies in this space.
Makes sense. So what's your overall assessment of Freeport-McMoRan as an investment opportunity?
Well, I think they have a lot of potential. But it's important to remember that there are always risks involved, as with any investment.
Right, of course. No investment is without risk.
Exactly. But I think Freeport is well positioned to capitalize on the growing demand for copper. And their commitment to innovation suggests that they're looking for ways to create value even in a challenging market environment.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're cautiously optimistic.
I would say so.
All right, well, that's great insight. I appreciate you breaking it all down for us.
You're welcome.
Now, before we wrap up, it's time for everyone's favorite segment. This is not financial advice.
All right, let's do it.
Are you ready to let loose with a wild but plausible trade idea based on what we've learned about Freeport?
Always up for a challenge. What if Freeport decides to double down on their U.S. growth strategy and spins off their Indonesian operations?
Whoa, hold on. That's a bold move.
It is. But hear me out.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine two separate publicly traded companies. On one hand, you have this U.S.-focused copper powerhouse, benefiting from favorable government policies and the growing demand for critical minerals in the clean energy transition. And on the other hand, you have a purely Indonesian play, leveraged to the long-term potential of Grasberg, which could attract investors seeking exposure to that specific market.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. It's like creating two distinct investment opportunities.
Exactly. Investors could choose their level of risk and exposure, and it might actually unlock significant value for both entities.
Interesting. So the U.S. entity could capitalize on the Made in America narrative and potentially benefit from things like tax credits for critical mineral production.
Right. And the Indonesian entity could attract investors who are bullish on Indonesia's long-term growth prospects.
It's a radical idea, but it does align with some of the key trends we're seeing in the market.
It does, and it would simplify Freeport's narrative, allowing each company to focus on its unique strengths and opportunities.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal here. It's bold, it's audacious, and just might work.
Exactly. It's thinking outside the box.
But again, folks, this is not financial advice.
Of course not.
It's just a fun thought experiment to get those investment juices flowing.
Precisely. Always good to consider unconventional possibilities.
Absolutely.
Sure.
All right, well, that was a great discussion. I really appreciate your insights.
Happy to share them.
So, dear listeners, there you have it. Our deep dive into Freeport-McMoRan's Q4 2024 earnings call. We covered their performance, their growth strategy, their financial position, and even threw in a wild trade idea for good measure.
Hopefully we gave you some food for thought.
I think we did. Now, before we sign off, any final thoughts or key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the key takeaway here is that Freeport is a company in transition. They're facing some challenges, but they're also embracing new opportunities. And their commitment to innovation suggests that they're well-positioned for the future.
Okay, so a company to watch.
Definitely keep an eye on them.
All right, will do. Thanks again for joining us.
You're welcome.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay curious.
El Abra is a project of epic proportions. It's going to be huge.
It definitely sounds like it. Can you remind us what exactly they're building there and what kind of impact it's expected to have on their production?
So picture this, a brand new concentrator, a desalination plant to provide like massive amounts of water for their process, and a pipeline stretching for miles to transport it all.
Okay, so we're not talking about a small operation here.
Definitely not. This is El Abra in a nutshell. And once it's all up and running, it's going to add a mind-blowing 750 million pounds of copper to Freeport's annual production.
Wow, that is a serious amount of copper.
Oh, yeah. And on top of that, they'll be getting another 9 million pounds of molybdenum.
Okay, so not just copper then.
Nope, molybdenum too, which is also a valuable industrial metal.
Interesting. So it's a long-term investment, but with the potential to significantly boost their output.
Oh.
But as we've said, it's a multi-year endeavor. What's the timeline looking like for El Abra?
Realistically, we're looking at a 7 to 8 year time frame before it's fully operational.
Okay, so patience is key with this one.
For sure. The permitting process is still ongoing, and construction on this scale just takes time.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So they're really setting themselves up for some major growth down the road.
Exactly. They're playing the long game.
So to sum up, we've got a company with a global footprint, a strong financial position, a commitment to innovation, and some seriously ambitious growth plans.
It's a pretty impressive picture.
It is. What does all of this mean for investors who are following Freeport-McMoRan?
Well, I think Freeport is a company at a crossroads, balancing the immense potential of their Indonesian operations with these exciting new opportunities in the U.S. and elsewhere.
It's like they're juggling a lot of different balls in the air.
They are. But their performance in Q4 2024 shows that they're capable of navigating a really complex global landscape and still deliver value to shareholders.
So they've got a proven track record.
They do. And I think what's most intriguing to me is their focus on innovation as a driver of future growth.
Right, like the whole leach everywhere thing and those autonomous trucks we talk about.
Exactly. They're not afraid to embrace new technologies and find new ways of doing things.
And that's got to be appealing to investors who are looking for companies that are not just profitable, but also positioned for long-term growth in a rapidly changing world.
Absolutely. I think Freeport is a company worth keeping an eye on.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining us and sharing your insights.
You're welcome.
So to all of our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to our deep dive into Freeport-McMoRan's Q4 2024 earnings call. We hope you found it insightful, and as always, remember to do your own research before making any investment decisions.
Absolutely. This is not financial advice.
Exactly. We're just here to provide you with information and hopefully some food for thought.
And a little entertainment along the way.
Always, until next time, stay curious.